You see, I learned my lesson this time. When we bought water last night, Ben said, "You're giving them water again? Do you not remember what happened the last time when they were doing all of the water bottle flipping?" I said, "Yes, but this time they aren't keeping it." So adults, please don't flip your water bottles. Oh, I tell you. I was also extremely impressed that Ben remembered a children's sermon from that was months ago. So you're paying attention. It's a good thing. And so we come to that time of year. The time of year when our brains filter back to 1776 and we reflect and wonder how it's possible that the world turned in such a way to bring us precisely here. To a country that proclaims itself to be the home of the free and the brave, a country that still strives to declare its independence in all that we do, a country that when time gets tough, still hearkens back to our founding fathers and wonders what they would do if they were in our shoes. As we come ever closer to our 241st anniversary of independence, I found myself wondering, when we think of the American Revolution, who do we think of? Seriously, as we sit in this place some scant amount of miles away from where our freedom and independence was finally won, who do we think of when we think of the men and women who fought so valiantly for our independence all those years ago? Who springs to mind? Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton. There, yes, Carol Bessem's holding down the Hamilton. I heard one. There was one other I heard. Patrick Henry. Thank you for that. All right. Benjamin Franklin. Yes. You said Washington. Absolutely. You see, our minds go in a variety of places, but there are some people that we can't help but think of when we think of 1776. To men like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, no one mentioned John Adams and James Madison. While it is true that we wouldn't have had independence without them, it begs the question, were they all that we needed? Would we have found independence without Paul Revere and his voice ringing out across a darkened night? Would we have found independence without men like Patrick Henry proclaiming, "Give me liberty or give me death"? What about men like Nathan Hale, who only had one life to give for his country? What about Hercules Mulligan, one of Washington's first spies? What about Abigail Adams, who begged her husband to remember women when it came to considering the future of America? What about Crispus Attucks, the first person to die in the Boston Massacre? Would we have had independence without them? Well, we can point to Valley Forge and Yorktown and the Delaware River as obvious moments when independence was won. What about the unsung heroes? What about those who did the tiniest of things to push the cause forward? What about those names that we don't often remember? What about their contributions? Would we have had a revolution? Would we have had independence without them? It's hard to say. The revolution wasn't just one thing, but rather a combination of 1,000 tiny things that culminated in the declaration that we believe that all men were created equal. Not one thing did that, but many. It's been a rough slog through the gospel the last couple of weeks. We have listened along with the disciples as Jesus has told them of the slings and arrows they will face as he sends them out to proclaim the gospel. Jesus has warned them of the dangers that they will face, of the risks of being an apostle, and maybe it's left you wondering if discipleship is really for you. Maybe it's left you feeling a bit worried or concerned. Maybe the last few weeks of the gospel has made you feel as though the gospel, the cross itself, is too big of a burden to carry, like you aren't equipped for a journey as dangerous as this. Maybe it's left you feeling like the message of the gospel, the work of the kingdom, is best left to the George Washington and Thomas Jeffersons of the world, those with voices big enough, shoulders broad enough, courage strong enough to actually get the job done. Into those worries and fears, into those doubts and hesitancies comes today's gospel. A few simple verses that serve as a summation of everything that Jesus has said over the last couple of weeks. A few simple verses that actually come down to one or two words into the big, hard, scary call of discipleship that Jesus has just explained. He brings two words to relieve the burden. words like welcome, and words like even. At the end of the day, as the disciples are finally on the brink of heading out into the world, Jesus takes a deep breath and decides that maybe it's best to sum up all of this persecution and division language with a bit of simplicity. He looks at them and tells them that maybe, just maybe, discipleship comes down to simple things, like allowing yourself to be welcomed and welcoming others in return. He looks at these men who probably didn't feel equipped for what they were about to embark upon, and he tells them that maybe their apostleship can come down to something as simple as even a cup of cold water. They have this big, huge gospel to preach, this big, huge kingdom to help bring, and really, maybe all they need to do is welcome and be welcomed. Maybe all they need to do is give the thirsty something to drink. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Well, it should. Because honestly, at the end of the day, that's what discipleship is: some water and a welcome. I think when it comes to our own discipleship in this, the year of our Lord 2017, we get in our heads a bit too much. Just like everything else in our lives, we have a tendency to overthink our commission and call as disciples. We think if we can't feed every person, if we can't end every injustice, if we can't change the entire world in 0.2 seconds, if we can't reach every single person who hasn't heard about Jesus, well, then we're failing at our baptismal calling. We think if the whole world can't see what we're doing, if there isn't some colossal impact from our actions, that maybe we aren't really equipped to do the work of the kingdom. We think that maybe the gospel is best left to the Mother Teresas and Pope Francis's and Bishop Eatons of the world, because those seem like people who have it all together, who know what they're doing, who are capable of moving mountains with their discipleship. We think that the kingdom is brought in one big, huge gesture rather than in 1,000 tiny ones. People of God, that is not the case. Sometimes the gospel is as simple as saying hello, as asking a stranger how their day has been. I know it doesn't seem like much, but in a world where so many are shut out and told they don't have a place to welcome someone, to welcome a stranger, to welcome the lost or the lonely, to welcome the worried and the confused, to welcome the ignored, that is a radical act of discipleship. To walk in this world, in God's world, with arms wide open to welcome in those who have been rejected, is to stand in direct opposition to our culture and say to our world, in God's kingdom, all have a place at the table. To stand up in this culture and say that around this table, the rich and the poor, the weak and the strong, the child and the elder, the sick and the healthy, the proud and the humble, all have a place, is to speak a word that many have forgotten. To welcome someone is to speak a word of the gospel. And sometimes the gospel is as simple as allowing yourself to be welcomed. We think it sounds so easy, and yet is there anything more vulnerable than allowing yourself to be welcomed, to be held, to be seen by another person? Is there anything that screams discipleship more than allowing your neighbor to care for you in whatever way you need it? Allowing someone to pray for you, allowing someone to feed you, allowing someone to care for you. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable, maybe even weak, in front of your brother or sister is to enter into discipleship together and say, this is who Jesus calls us to be. Neighbors who walk together, who are willing to take care of each other and lean on each other when we are in need, and sometimes even when we aren't. Sometimes the gospel is as simple as even a cup of cold water. To the one who is hot and parched, who has been ignored by so many before you, that cup of water is a cup of life. And isn't that what Jesus calls us to do? To bring life and love to one another? To the person standing on the corner who has lost their job, their hope, their everything, your few dollars could feel like $1 million. To the starving person, to the one who has been walked by 100 times, that sandwich, that little something extra that you just tossed in your grocery cart can feel like a banquet feast. To the person who has been ignored and told that they aren't good enough, who has been told that they don't have a place, your smile could be like coming home. It doesn't seem like much, I know. It might not be a revolution in and of itself, but it could help bring about a revolution that looks an awful lot like the kingdom of heaven on earth. Jesus didn't come to earth to walk amongst broken, simple humans and expect to find disciples of heroic proportions. Jesus came looking for genuine, everyday disciples who engage in the ordinary but life-changing gospel acts like loving their neighbor. Disciples who engage in the constant, never-ceasing work of caring for their brothers and sisters in small, simple ways. I saw this week in the simple act of hundreds of teenage kids who spend so much of their time in situations where they are judged and bullied and pressured, taking time out of their summer to honestly spend most of their time simply praying for each other, who took every opportunity they could to just hug each other as often as they could before the week was out. You have not seen a passing of the peace until you have seen 140 kids who love each other take 20 minutes to pass the peace because they want to hug every single person there. In our world, kindness, hospitality, love, they're radical concepts. Sure, they aren't bright and flashy. Maybe they don't move mountains. Maybe no one will put your face on a dollar bill because of it. But that doesn't mean those simple acts aren't revolutionary. You don't have to be a hero to be a disciple. You just have to maybe be someone's hero. And sometimes there is nothing more heroic, more revolutionary than saying, "Come in, have a glass of water. You're welcome here." I know it isn't exactly the Declaration of Independence, but every day, simple discipleship, that'll bring freedom to someone. It might just bring freedom to us all. Amen.